Hi, guys. In today's episode of The Next Step, we have Jitesh with us. The objective of this series is to talk to people with different career paths and different career stories and understand how they have navigated their path and how they've made decisions to go from one step to the other. So, thank you, Jitesh, for being with us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Awesome. Jitesh, to kick things off, if you could please start with a brief introduction about yourself, covering your education and work background, that would help.
Sure. My name is Jitesh Luthra. I originally hail from Lucknow, but largely spent my time in Delhi. I did my schooling in Delhi, then undergrad from Manipal from computer science. Across various things after that, over the last 7 years, I now work for Bloom Ventures, an early stage venture capital fund based out of Bangalore. And yeah, that's what I do.
Okay, so just to go back to when you were graduating from Manipal and you were looking at your first job out of college. So really, what we wanted to understand is how you thought about cracking placements. What was your thought process? What kind of roles were you looking at? Were you looking at core roles, non-core roles? Because I understand, I think you went into IT advisory, so into perhaps a consulting field. So how did
Yeah.
you think through placements when you were graduating?
Good question. I was sitting in placements in 2012. This is right about the time when Flipkart and like startups were still new in general overall, right? So for me, it was I was in computer science, but I didn't really love to code. So that left with very little options, given that Manipal was not a tier one college where people came for non-tech roles as well. So that left consulting as one of the verticals. Within that, I did my research. So I found out that Deloitte used to come for campus, but most of the consulting firms who came to campus in Manipal were for back-end roles where you never got to meet the clients. So that made me not. I had actually a campus placement offer at Deloitte also, US, India, and Hyderabad. But I did my research and I got through my network, got through KPMG IT advisory, which was a mix of consulting and a bit of implementation. So it was also client facing because I wanted to meet people than just sit in a office and code.
Got it. So, if you were to give advice or tips to students who are sitting through placement, so it's placement season in India right now, any advice that you would give them? For instance, you mentioned that you did research, you leveraged your network to get the role that you wanted. So, anything, few pointers that you would want to give students?
I think the biggest mistake that I made that I hope people don't make is ask. Ask your seniors, ask your alumni, um, ask people about this, and do your research. I think the biggest problem that happened, I remember, at least in my time, placements were considered such a big deal, and it was just it's just a very different atmosphere in colleges at that time because everybody's just going through a lot of emotions. Somebody got through, somebody didn't. I have a dream company and this and that. I think the true thing to realize is that a placement is not a career. A career happens over 10 years. Or to be successful in a particular field, you have to have done things for a longer time. So I would say research is very important. Don't just sway by what is looking cool just because it's looking cool for other people. And if you don't gel with it, you don't have to apply for a Microsoft just because it pays a lot of money. Because if you can't code, you will not be able to go through it. And even if you get through it because you did some way, just found your way through, you'll not be able to survive it. Because
Yeah.
fundamentally you have to love code. So I think that intersection, I think, is very important. That is the main advice I would give to take a step back and at least and talk to people, talk to seniors, talk to people who have been through these journeys up to 10 years. I think greater than 10 years, maybe 7, 8 at max, is the best set of people to talk to because greater than that, you're just a different generation. I didn't do that a lot. So I think that should be one, certainly, an advice that I would give.
Okay, so just building a little bit on that, how would you recommend that students build their network? So you said speak to seniors who are in the college, but if someone wants to build a network, what would you say two, three things that they should try to do consistently?
No, I mean, outside. So, for example, I already work with one student at least who will graduate in 2022. And he WhatsApps me whenever he wants. My point is that I think if we're just afraid to ask people, and half the time once you ask, you will realize people want to share as well. So the right way in this is don't go to college seniors, go to LinkedIn, and it's not that difficult to find people. You'll have to spend your time. It's not going to be thrown into you on a platter. You'll have to spend hours on LinkedIn. I think that's the best place to try and find the kind of people. So match this around. Who went to Google? Who went to Microsoft? Who went to a venture capital firm? Who started up? Who's in Deloitte? Ping them on LinkedIn. You'll have to do this a little bit on your own, and that itself is a learning experience. And you will reach out to 50, maybe 5 will reply, and maybe one you will stay in touch with, and that's how it works.
So it's interesting you mentioned that some people will start up, like who has started up, because you did that after your consulting role. You set up your own foundation, own company. So what was the journey like? What was the decision making process? Why did you choose to start your own company, and how did you navigate that period as a founder?
So I'll actually rewind before that. My first venture was actually in Manipal in 2012. It was not as structured as much, but we were incubated inside NUTBI. So my actual roots or bug of entrepreneurship was sown in college itself, much before I finally started up like 2 years later. But coming back to the decision of starting up at that time, which was about 18 months into it. So when I was in consulting, I realized that I didn't like it. I liked meeting people, I liked meeting clients, but it was too structured, too hierarchical. Like aptitude was not rewarded as much because there was a structure. Things happened the way they happened, right? And I didn't like that beyond a point. I was in the field of analytics and I wanted to do more. The decision to jump on, honestly, was fairly easy. I took a bit of time looking at the idea that we were going to pursue along with my co-founders. We spent more time in it. Also, I started to realize when I was subconsciously thinking about it, right? That those were hints for me. Like when I'm not supposed to do anything about it, but I'm still thinking about it. Those were hints saying, okay, great, maybe you should do something about it. The final decision came when I thought I was 23 years old when I did this. I said, okay, dude, what's the worst case? I'm at home in Delhi. 6 months down the line, worst case, I'll not have a job and I'll not have this. That's actually okay. So I think on one hand, people should cover their bases and understand what their non-negotiables are. I was lucky enough to be in Delhi where my parents live, so I don't have to worry about rent and some of the basics. I think the early times of your career are for experimentation. Play around with it. Those times were probably different 10, 15 years ago, but now that's respected. And that's appreciated if somebody's doing these things. Taking a sabbatical also is not a new thing, right? So I think those, I would say, are big things. Just be very clear. If you start thinking about it when you're not supposed to, I think those are those subtle cues. Because otherwise you are in a full-time job, right? And just make sure your worst cases are covered. So if I were just to add to that, if I were to do this now, where I don't live with my family and I live away, my worst cases are making sure I have an emergency fund of X, a corpus, which I can say, okay, if I don't earn for the next 1 year or 6 months or 8 months, my expenses are covered.
Got
So I
it.
think these generally ways help people take this decision, and then it just flows from there because you need deep passion for this.
So you also mentioned that you were working through and thinking through the idea with your co-founders. For any young professional or a student who's looking to start up, one of the questions that can come up is how does one even go about finding co-founders? So what was your experience like in that regard, and is there something you want to share on that aspect?
So I got very lucky in that sense because I started up with my best friend from college and his best friend from school. So it generally, I think the default look around you, if you keep talking to more, it's serendipity, it's engineering serendipity. You just keep talking to people, something will click. So in my case, so I knew my friend directly anyway from Manipal. His best friend was coming back from the US thinking about this broader idea, and he said, hey, who all can we partner with? My friends knew about my streak of wanting to do different things. I had taken a stint in college. So I was the first port of call because that's how I was perceived within my friend circle. I still am because I've taken a very different career path, right? So that's how it started. He said, hey, I'm meeting this friend of mine. Let's chat. And honestly, after a point, you just want to work with people who you like. So this one guy who I had never spoken to before, we hit it off, and three of us are practically family now. So I think that's even more important. So in this case, for people, I think just the more you keep meeting people and talking about interesting things, something will click. And the natural thing I would obviously expect is people around you, people close to you who you trust, who you feel will have or bring certain value to the table. So it could be a friend of yours who's a great coder, who you could try and convince. Everything is about selling on this anyway. So I think those two, three can be great ways. People are trying to solve for it now by bringing in programs and getting strangers to meet. I think co-founder relationship is worse than a marriage in a lot of ways, even an investor-founder relationship. But so it's tough. But if there's enough passion, you'll find a way.
So you sound very passionate about your startup and the whole process of building a new company. And today you are working with a venture capital firm. So could you talk to us a little bit about how that shift happened from startup to VC today? And the second part of the question would be, how do you see your career or your roles and responsibilities in the venture capital industry panning out?
Great. So my shift to VC was purely accidental, and it was never, none of the things that I have done in my career have been planned. They've all been just keep doing what you like, and some things will come up. So when I exited my startup around 2017, we moved to Bombay with a company which acquired us. So I spent 2 years in early stage roles. My last role before Bloom was actually with one of their portfolio companies. That's how I got noticed uh, by them, because VCs don't hire off the bat directly. It's less number of people are hired, and in general, you want to. I would say it's more like a large enterprise sales process where you just want to be comfortable with the person. So it could take years. So for me, it was purely accidental when I was looking out for new roles late in 2018. One of the Bloom guys, Sajid, who I used to interact a lot with, said, "Hey, I don't know if there's a direct role fit for you, but you're a culture fit in the firm. We feel you think like us. There are a couple of roles coming up on the platform side, the non-investment side, and I think it'll be an interesting fit. Why don't you talk more?" And 4 months later, they liked me enough to, or we liked each other enough to do this. So it was a very, as I said, it was just serendipity that I was catching up with him. What is the result of that? It's just a result of, again, talking to people. Everything is ultimately about just making sure you're surrounded by people who match your mental wavelength and you have enough smart things to talk about. Rest generally flows. On your second question about what my career path is, I don't know. I love doing what I do right now, for one main reason that, so just for context, I work at a fund, but I don't look at investments at all. I work on platforms which is post investments. My job is to help the companies that Bloom funds. I come in after the fundraise is done and help them with sales and business development. So I manage a lot of our corporate and ecosystem partnerships, trying to grow their sales. I relate very deeply to this because this was a problem I faced when I was a founder. When I was a founder and we raised money in 2015, I didn't have that kind of support from my investors. And I always thought that investors don't do these things. So for me, it's now being on the other side, being able to give back and try and think like a founder. It becomes very easy to do some of these things. This could grow in multiple ways. I mean, I don't rule myself out being a founder at some point. The truth is, I don't know. And I think you have to be okay with that, because if you're okay with your day to day and how the broader direction is going because you're making an impact, things will fall into place. I'm not a fan of linear growth paths where there are things every 2 years, etc. I'm okay with the uncertainty. The good thing, at least at Bloom, is that I know I can be here as long as I want, because I really love what I'm doing. For me, that's more important than any other small 30% gain in salary that I will do by shifting somewhere else.
I just also wanted to understand, you have had different since you've started your own company, you worked in corporate. Have you thought about higher studies? And if yes, what's your take on it in terms of how it helps with career progression, etc.
We are all in India. At some point, all our parents have told us, "Beta MBA kar lo," right? So yes, I have thought about it. I've been pushed into it, but I think where I am now, it does not make sense for me at this point. Um, it's People do MBA for various reasons. The most popular reason, in my opinion, is to shift careers. I've already shifted my career. I'm already in a biz dev front facing role despite having an engineering degree. So for me, an MBA's value is not the same as most of these people. So no, I don't plan to do it at this point. For if I would, it would be much more for the networking and the people. For you to stand out, again, you have to do different things. So be very careful what you're optimizing for. If you're doing an MBA to shift a career, sure, it works for a lot of people. Uh, but again, there are many, many more ways to use that money to upskill yourself in this digital first environment. So I personally am not for an MBA unless for the right reason. So, like for example, I would not do it in India for sure. If I were to do it at some point, and the reasons are reducing now in today's pandemic environment, would be to go somewhere outside to at least have a multicultural experience. But that would be more of a reason than saying, "Boss, I need an MBA brand." That's just the way I look at it, because I think it just gives you a head start. That's about it. But there's far more that you can do working and operating and actually learning how things are done, than just study on it on a presentation.
Jitesh, this actually brings me to one of our last questions. You mentioned you have a unconventional career path, so to speak. Uh, is there an advice that you would like to give people who are looking at similar things fundamentally? People who are also are interested in starting now. People who are also sort of passionate about what they do, but they're also figuring things out by talking to people. So for people who are watching, students, professionals who are watching this video, is there something that you would like to share with them? Some fundamentals that have held you in good stead throughout?
So my biggest learnings have been to understand that everything compounds, and we are in a generation where we like quick fixes, but quick fixes don't exist. And those will be some, I think, just get learned through experience. But the whole thing I would like to say to at least the people who are either graduating or thinking of graduating is to don't look at the winners. We suffer from a survivorship bias, and a confirmation bias, that you will read about the fundraise and want to become a founder, but founder journeys are very tough. They are very lonely, and they're very long, right? So internalize some of these things, play around, experiment, do multiple internships if that requires, and if you can do it, work, hustle your way through. Because if you have to try and do things other people have not, you'll have to go through ways other people have not. It's very easy to follow the regular paths and say, and that's okay with it. So if you're okay, you want stability, you want to continue working for a big tech company in a certain way, nothing wrong in that. There's enough value, enough money, everything there. But if you want to do something different, I think don't be afraid, uh, because there are enough people who have done that. Again, your research will find you. I mean, I'm happy to speak to anybody who comes out and says, "Yeah, I want to do this," because ultimately you just have to reach out, keep meeting people, and just keep following that path. It's generic, but unfortunately, it's the only way, in my opinion, to solve for this. Because if there was a playbook, everybody would have done this.
Awesome. I'm sure this is going to be super helpful. So really, thank you for being with us today, spending your time today with us.